Julie and Todd Chrisley were convicted of fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Their conviction was based on fraud. The government said that the Chrisleys defrauded banks in Georgia out of over $36 million by filing false applications and false paperwork to acquire those loans. They also said that they hid the earnings from their hit television show, Chrisley Knows Best, from the IRS and did not report it as income, which was shielding that income from the government. A lot of this came to fruition when they filed for bankruptcy and the government was able to see what their earnings truly were. The evidence that came out in the courtroom during the Chrisleys trial was shocking. So much documentary evidence leading to the jury's ultimate conclusion that they were guilty. But the reality is, the pardon process is really in the hands of the President of the United States. So if there are other reasons outside of what was presented in the courtroom that the President feels justify a pardon, then there really isn't anything that can be said or anything that can be done to stop it. Alice Johnson is what the president calls his pardon czar. She was actually pardoned from her conviction for drug trafficking and conspiracy in 2020, and she has since been a criminal justice advocate. She has advocated very, very hard for the Chrisleys, as well as many other individuals who she believes has sentences that are disproportionate to their crime. It's likely that her advocacy got this on the president's desk much earlier than going through the traditional process of pardon. The Department of Justice has a process for anybody who's been convicted of a federal crime to seek a pardon from the president. But there's a 5-year waiting period from the conviction before that individual can even try to seek a pardon through the Department of Justice. However, there's a loophole to that. The president can circumvent all of those policies and all of those rules by taking an individual interest in a case. It's likely that Alice Johnson was able to get this before Trump so that he could actually make this decision much quicker than it would have been through the traditional procedural aspect of the DOJ. The president does not have to identify the reason why a pardon is granted. That's how broad the power of the president is. In fact, somebody doesn't even have to be charged or convicted or sentenced for a pardon to be granted. This type of case where there are pending appellate issues regarding Fourth Amendment violations, as well as appellate issues relating to the severity of the sentence, is one that the Office of Pardons or the president can take a look at and decide whether or not a pardon is appropriate. Savannah says that she's been working tirelessly to get her parents released in the 2.5 years since they've been convicted and are now serving their sentences. And this has been through a lot of appellate action, both challenging the conviction, seeking to overturn the conviction, and also challenging the sentences, saying that they were more severe than other cases that are similar factually. Now, her advocacy absolutely was one of the factors that got this case the notoriety that it needs to go directly to the president as opposed to the other procedural avenue through the Department of Justice. The Chrisleys on appeal have raised many constitutional challenges to their conviction. They've cited violations of their Fourth Amendment rights. They've also said that they were targets because of their political affiliations. All of those issues have been raised on appeal. And they're also challenging their conviction. Prior to their sentencing, there were what's called pre-sentence reports that were submitted by both the prosecution and the defense. The defense had a completely different view on what was the amount of time that would be allocated to individuals who were first-time offenders and had not had prior arrests for these types of crimes. So there were very legitimate arguments raised by the defense on appeal that have been spoken about at length publicly by Savannah Chrisley and the rest of the Chrisley family. All of that is likely to be what helped gain attention to get this before the president. And in fact, many of the arguments that have been raised on appeal, specifically relating to the government targeting the Chrisleys, those have been parroted by the president in stating why this pardon is happening now. So it's very clear that the family's advocacy was effective in achieving this result. There were many issues with the Chrisley sentences, and there's a lot of factors that are taken into account when a judge sentences a defendant who's been convicted. One of those factors is whether or not they have a prior criminal history. So, in their appeals, and many lawyers looking at this case thought that that factor was not really considered to the extent that it should have been. And the judge in sentencing was very focused on the element of remorse, that they had not shown remorse for their actions. So the sentences were ultimately within the federal guidelines, which is the amount of time that can be sustained on appeal. But there were a lot of really significant legal challenges. So Savannah Chrisley, believing that her parents' sentence was too high under the circumstances, is a really valid argument and something we might have seen actually been affected on appeal had that process played out.
Now, Savannah's sister Chloe said she doesn't want to get her hopes up because something bad could happen here. Is there anything that could potentially reverse this release?
The president has such broad discretion to grant pardons that there is no mechanism to contest it, meaning nothing can really happen so long as President Trump follows through on what he said, that he's going to grant a full pardon for Todd and Julie Chrisley. Understanding that the family has been through some ups and downs in this legal battle, for instance, having some appellate victories only to find their parents' sentences remain, it makes sense that they're questioning whether or not this will actually come to fruition. A pardon will end their sentence. They will be free, but it does not actually expunge the criminal record. So their conviction on these federal crimes will still be on the books. Now, the president has said that the pardon is full, which means that there won't be any conditions like probation upon release. That being said, there are certain aspects that could impact them moving forward because that conviction will still be on their record. For instance, their right to vote. It depends on what state you're in, but convicted felons in some states cannot vote. In other states, they can vote once their sentence has been served. So it will depend on where they live. Other aspects that could impact them, if they were to commit another crime in the future, the fact that they are convicted felons on these serious federal crimes could be an element that is looked at in their sentencing and could make a sentence more severe. Even though they're pardoned, the conviction generally stays on the record, meaning they will still be convicted felons in the eyes of the law.